Welcome to the Computational Antitrust podcast. My name is Thibault Schrepel. I'm a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center and the creator of the Computational Antitrust project, which explores how legal informatics can benefit antitrust law. The project gathers over 55 competition agencies and 35 academics in the advisory board. Each month, we publish an academic article on the subject of computational antitrust. You may find them at computationalantitrust.com. Today, I'm thrilled to be receiving Fabiana Di Porto, Tatjana Grote, Gabriele Volpi, and Riccardo Invernizzi, who co-authored a paper for us entitled I See Something You Don't See, a computational analysis of Digital Service Act and the Digital Markets Act. The four of them combine legal and computer science expertise, and for that reason, I am very grateful for having you today and for your article. So welcome to you all, and let us get started immediately. My first question to start with is, how are you doing, and where are you located those days?
Thank you very much, Thibault, for having us here today. We are located, personally, I am located in Italy. At the moment, I am on the seaside, but of course, as most of us, I'm located in front of a computer, so I could be everywhere. I'm fine, thank you, and very happy to be here with you and to present our paper on computational antitrust and computational analysis of the DSA DMA.
Yeah, it's always good to see you. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. Who's next?
Well, maybe I'll go next. Also from my side, thanks so much for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm doing great, thank you. I'm in Germany right now, west of Germany, near Frankfurt. That's pretty much it.
Thank you very much. For me, it's like an honor to present a paper for your journal. And yes, for me, I'm in the north of Italy, in a city near Milan, which is called Pavia, and I'm quite good.
Good to hear.
It's a pleasure for me too to be here. And I'm like Gabriele, I'm in Pavia, which is where I study, and I'm doing fine, thanks.
All right, so everyone's doing fine. This is good to hear. So I guess we can now discuss computational antitrust a bit. I have to say that I'm particularly excited with your article because I think it's a first of its kind. I'm curious to hear if maybe you've read something similar, but I certainly haven't. This is the first time I've read a antitrust article trying to leverage computational tools in a way to automate and to enrich the analysis of the laws and regulations themselves. So I was wondering if you could take us through the paper in 2 minutes or so, explain how you came to the idea of writing this paper and what's the main takeaway.
Sure. Well, the idea of the paper came during the sabbatical year I spent last year at the law faculty of the Hebrew University. There, I work on digital markets in a highly interdisciplinary environment on the debate over its reform. Well, after winning a tender for a research project on algorithmic disclosure regulation, we set up a team together with Tatjana, with two wonderful data scientists who you met, and worked together remotely, meaning that we never met, for nearly 1 year. Now, coming to your question, most computational analysis of law focus on the text or application of adopted law. But we were wondering, actually, what happens before that? Now, if a regulation turns out to be less effective, there is substantial unclarity around the meaning of some key terms. Can we identify the roots of such problems as early as in the lawmaking process? Now, the idea of the paper is to have a closer look at the EU Commission's consultation process of what came to be the DMA, the Digital Market Act, and the Digital Services Act proposals. Now, these two are especially relevant because they contain a lot of new terms. Let's think, for example, to the term gatekeeper, tipping, and a lot of terms like these ones. Which were far from clear at the point of the first consultation, which was before the publication of these two proposals. So we decided to use algorithms to automatically download the replies to the questionnaires, which stakeholders were asked to submit, and some more detailed position papers, which were also attached to those replies. We then built 3 groups of stakeholders which were individuals and micro contributors, small contributors, and then medium and large contributors based on the organization size. Then we applied algorithms to allow us to basically map out how certain terms are used by these groups. You can quite literally imagine it is a map. In the last step, we then basically laid these maps, which allowed us to quantify the semantic relations between words for each group, next to each other, to check for which words we find a significant distance. In other words, we found inconsistent understandings across these groups. Now, because we applied a statistical test in doing so, we can say a certain degree of confidence that these differences are not merely random, but they are actually systematic. And we did indeed find some significant differences for some key terms. And this means that basically these groups do use these terms differently. And this is very interesting, and this can be very useful for competition authorities around the world, because that means that actually stakeholders do use these terms and do have different understanding of these terms. And this is what we found.
But so I'm curious to hear, why did you start the paper? Was it that because you were reading those consultations and you thought, well, it looks like, they are using those terms in a totally different way? Or did you have the idea even before that and you thought, well, why not?
We had the idea before of using computational tools, and we had the idea of actually using algorithms in order to analyze text, because NLP techniques, as we will discuss maybe later in greater details with our data scientists, can actually help us read much greater quantities of documents, and therefore we decided to apply the different techniques to a consultation process, where usually authorities, and especially in this case, competition authorities, do have to deal with huge quantities of documents, and this is how the idea came out. And therefore, we combined our forces in order to have institutional insights and legal insights and data scientist insights in order to decide which were the best techniques to distantly reading all the documents that we could download from the Commission's websites, and that's how the idea came to us.
I mean, I guess we cannot stress enough the importance of getting some data and some information in the first place. So the fact that those consultations were made public was, not only necessary, but also essential to your paper. So that's something, I guess, to be discussed. But so diving into the results of your paper, so you do show that there are indeed statistically significant differences between the stakeholders groups in the way they use some terms and concepts which are computational related. And so to be very specific, you do show that the terms gatekeepers, monopoly, uncompetitive, pro-competitive, tipping, self-preferencing, etc. were given different meanings by all of those stakeholders. However, and I found that to be very interesting, some other terms such as market power and dominance were used consistently by those stakeholders. So now my question is the following: can we conclude that we need to be able to put numbers? Because, I mean, indeed, as we know, market power and dominance, we have lots of case law showing that if you have more than 50% of the market, then you might be dominant, and 70% even more so. So do we need to be able to put numbers, or at least very clear criteria behind words, so that people use them in a consistent manner? Or do you think that this is not necessarily the case?
Well, I think it is definitely a highly plausible hypothesis. That's for sure. Now, I think we also need to stress that our methodology does not allow for causal inference. So that means we can identify inconsistencies, we can say that they exist, but we're not yet at a point where we can fully explain why they occur. At least we cannot test that we cannot test it empirically as a hypothesis. But of course, I mean, we see certain patterns. And I think one of the clearest patterns that we saw was that these very new terms like gatekeepers, like self-preferencing, or some that are used in the debate, but not, as you said, discussed by courts very often and that do not have clear criteria, like pro-competitive, for instance. Those terms, they did show up more often in the list of terms that were not used consistently. So although our methodology does unfortunately at this point not allow us to empirically kind of prove this or a causal link between them, or between how clearly defined a term is and how many inconsistencies in use we find, our results definitely suggest such a connection, I think. Now, in the paper, we put a lot of emphasis on, and also give some ideas on how this research could be expanded in the future. And I think finding a definite answer to this question is definitely something that would be of interest. And in fact, one idea could be to run the same algorithm on new data. To be more specific, the submissions to the current consultations on the DMA and the DSA. Now, the consultation that's a continuous process. So we analyze the submissions that were made before the proposals were published. Now we have the proposals, and especially in the DMA, we have a definition of the term gatekeeper that at least contains some quantitative elements, some very clear criteria. So I think what would be very, very interesting would be to basically just do the same thing all over again and check whether now that we have this definition with clear criteria, we find less inconsistencies in the use of the term gatekeeper, and maybe then compared with other terms where the Commission did not put forward a clear definition, and if they are still used very inconsistently, I think that would be a very, very strong hint in this direction, towards this conclusion that yes, we need clear criteria for people to really have a very consistent understanding of certain terms.
And so indeed, that's something I want to discuss, because it seems to me that if we push the idea of the article a bit further, I'm curious to know if you recommend to the European Commission to put clear and measurable definitions on the concept around which there is no consensus. So perhaps indeed, because the European Commission is giving us a clear and especially static definition of the word and the concept gatekeeper, it might be that in a few years, but already in the ongoing consultations, you will see that the stakeholders are using this concept of gatekeeper in a consistent manner. So my question is, do you think that not putting clear criteria behind those concepts is a failure of the DMA? Or is it just a natural process and something you can't blame the European Commission for?
The idea that we have now in the DMA some concepts that are for which there are clear criteria, like for instance the term gatekeeper is much better defined than terms such as self-preferencing, which remains a little bit more blurry, as you said. And yeah, I think that this, of course, links back to the question that we discussed earlier. We, of course, cannot definitely empirically test this hypothesis with with our tool, but it is definitely a conclusion that is in line with the patterns we find in our results. Now, of course, there's a general trade-off between very clear but yet static and less clear but more dynamic definitions, and especially when a field is evolving fast. A static definition might be soon outdated and hence lead to undesirable results because it might, for instance, not capture new developments that would need to be regulated. While on the other hand, dynamic definitions obviously offer more room for uncertainty. Well, in the end, it is up to the lawmaker to decide what is more important, clarity for now or flexibility for the future. Well, probably we will need to have more jurisprudence, case law, and repeated debates on these topics. And we will see a convergence probably for most terms, regardless of how clearly defined they are. Well, we analyzed a lot of terms, of novel terms, which, although they have been part of the debates, have only seldomly been clarified by the courts or even in subsequent legislation. So it would be interesting to see if we consider a common understanding of terms with clear, maybe even quantitative definitions develops faster than for more nebulous terms like, for instance, self-preferencing. So I think this question offers a lot for opportunities for future research in the field of computational antitrust.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking about when you were, explaining that indeed you may have a trade-off between legal certainty and also the flexibility for the future. Potentially, you may be able to find a middle ground. For instance, why not putting some sort of movement and growth within the definition of the term gatekeeper? So it may have been that you are a gatekeeper if the number of users is growing by more than 10% every year, for instance, something which is clear and also a bit more flexible. But that's indeed a debate to have in the future. Going back to the present days, you do conclude in the paper that the Commission identified several ex-ante measures and say that because of some sort of consensus, coming up with a DMA, and such as it is, was a good idea and something that will bring the support of most of the stakeholders. And you do say that, well, it might be not that easy because indeed those stakeholders are using the terms in a different way. So I'm wondering if it is already safe to conclude that compliance with the DMA and the DSA is not a given, and that we will see quite a lot of litigation precisely because the stakeholders disagree on what's the meaning of the DMA, what's the meaning of the concepts, what they entail, etc. So do you think that your paper is an early sign that the Commission should assign more than 80 people on the DMA enforcement, which was reported in the specialized press?
The point is that, of course, when we are dealing with very complex arguments, such as the ones the European Commission is complying with the DMA Act, there are a lot of different opinions for the different stakeholders. And so there is a large need in our days to use all the techniques and all the technologies to help understand better what are these kind of points and what could be like some kinds of disagreement points between different stakeholders. And so that's the reason why it's not important to have a very large group of work dealing with DMA, but it's important to have a multidisciplinary team which is also able to understand and use all of these new kind of technologies and techniques. So the most important things is to have very reliable and competitive member of the teams working and dealing with this kind of act. And so, for example, in our paper, we use the word embeddings and sentiment analysis techniques to show how we can demonstrate this kind of differences for a very particular topic words inside the DMA, and this kind of techniques could help. And so it's important that the European Commission, but also other national antitrust authorities should invest more and should hire some people who can understand this kind of techniques.
And Gabriele, let me ask you the following question. What do you think would have been able to achieve should you have a team of, let's say, 30 computer and data scientists in your paper? Did you encounter some things in which you thought at some point, well, it's too bad it's only, just a couple of us working on that paper, because with a large team, we could have done this and that?
Well, a lot. For our paper, 40 data scientists is quite a lot. So what could have helped, for example, be like a lot of people working and coding all the text. And so in this way, we could have like other kind of, we could have applied other kind of techniques. And so maybe had like more efficient and more complex results about our analysis. But for our analysis inside with our data, the 2 data scientists are enough. So what would maybe have helped us for our work would have been to have more data to analyze, and so to have a better model to use. Maybe that.
Yeah, excellent. So the labeling of the data would have been crucial. And so I'm curious to hear now, can you run the same analysis using only official publications to study, for instance, if the European Commission is consistent with itself? So not studying the stakeholders here, but just the European Commission, and potentially also join the General Court and the Court of Justice.
Yes, the idea is very interesting. And of course, we can restrict our attention to any set of documents. And by focusing only on the official ones, we can expect to reduce language artifacts or like misspelling or even grammar mistakes made by the contributors and public consultation. However, when dealing with official publications, there are two main issues to take into account. First of all, the amount of available data is reduced if compared with our research. And this can lead to less statistically significant results. Moreover, our analysis mainly focuses on keywords, and keywords tend to vary among different official documents. On the other hand, literature already shows the effectiveness of this kind of approaches in situations where we are expected to deal with the introduction of new concepts over time. And I would say that a common example is the translation from Shakespearean English to modern English. That is something similar. In conclusion, I would affirm that some adjustments are needed, but our method should work well as a baseline at least.
And so, how many documents did you use for your study, and how many you think will be, at least a minimal number you would need to have some statistically, significant results? Because for our listeners not doing computer or data science, we do have to say very clearly that you cannot run this analysis with only 10, documents of 5 pages. So could you give us some order of magnitude here?
Yeah, we used around 10,000 phrases, sentences from each group, and we did. What can be done is to use previously done work to use it as a baseline, as I said, and so we would need less document in the future probably, but the idea is that we can't use 1 or 2 or 10 documents, even if they are quite long, because we can expect a single document to be consistent with itself, at least with language connection between words. So the same words in the same document is probably used in the same way, and this is the first point. We need many documents. But then we also focus on the number of phrases, because if a document have 5 phrases, we can expect to find 50 terms at most. And because we are interested in connection, we need many connections, so long documents, and many different connections, so a big number of documents. We will probably not need a huge amount of documents going further, because we can reuse part of the work we did, but we still need some documents and some long documents with many words.
Well, two things springs to mind when listening to you. The first is that I've done some very basic natural language processing analysis of the DMA and the DSA to compare the two. And the amount of words per sentence is much higher, and I forgot in which one of the two, which I took as a sign that potentially the team, behind those two were actually different. So I'm not even sure if, there are consistencies between the DMA and the DSA. And I'll be curious to run the analysis actually within just one of those two to see if we do have consistency here. That's point number 1. And point number 2, something that you did mention, which is more for the substance of competition law. But if indeed we improve natural language processing and machine learning techniques so that we need less and less documents, this could also be something very important when it comes to the ability of new startups to compete with the tech giants, because potentially they will need less data than what used to be the case 10 years ago. But that's something for again, another avenue of research. I want to conclude asking you the final impossible question. Where do you think we'll be in 5 or 10 years from now in terms of what is possible to achieve in the field of antitrust using computational tools? So I don't know who's first on this one. But please go ahead.
Now, I think I cannot speak really about, the tech side of it, because I have more of a legal background, not a computer science background. But I think, there are 2 parts coming together here, which is on the one hand, of course, the technological development kind of, and I think Gabriele and Riccardo will be able to speak about that. But I think that we also just need more acceptance, even more acceptance in the legal community, because I think that, or I feel like for a lot of scholars or also practitioners with a legal background, the idea of using computational tools, using algorithm, is still a bit new. It's still a bit foreign to them sometimes. And I think it's great to see that competition law is, in my perception, kind of pacing ahead here or going ahead and moving forward on this more than other fields maybe. And I think that what will be necessary is for more people to kind of open up their minds and to actually maybe invest some time or just be willing to learn about the basic idea behind especially natural language processing, and to see how they can use it to tackle the legal questions that they have, because this is in the end what's interesting in this field. I think the questions, they require some knowledge of the content, so the law, but then the tools come obviously from a different discipline. And I think on the side of lawyers and legal scholars, I'm hoping and I'm expecting to see that more and more people open up to the idea that there's more. There's not just reading the law. There's not just reading a lot of literature. We can actually answer different questions or answer old questions in a new way. And I expect that all fields will within the fields of law will open up to this idea more, and that from the legal side there will be much more willingness to engage in this kind of interdisciplinary research. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, and very excited to see what's going to happen.
Same here. I'm glad we share the same optimism. And, funnily enough, it always comes down to human issues and the willingness of people to do things and learn about new things. So thank you very much. Curious to hear Gabriele, Riccardo, maybe from a more technical perspective, although feel free to discuss the law and social issues.
From a more technical point of view, what can be seen in the machine learning and artificial intelligence in the last year is the outcoming of unsupervised learning. That is what we done in our analysis. And the problem with supervised learning is that, as Gabriele said before, we need a lot of labeled data, and this is time-consuming. And in specific fields like antitrust or legal technology in general, we need a good expertise to label data. So we have not much people that can label data. And we also may have different experts that that have different opinion about specific terms, about specific laws, and the absence of a common agreement on terms, on phrases, made very hard to label data. And this is why in specific fields, machine learning is still struggling, because most powerful techniques are supervised and rely on labeled data. In the last years, unsupervised models, unsupervised techniques are coming out. So I think that in the next few years, those unsupervised techniques can make a jump ahead. We may have extraordinary results, and it's hard even to predict them, because being unsupervised, they can identify patterns that we don't see. And this is why they are really interesting. So they may lead to nothing, of course, we don't know, but they may lead to something really interesting. And I'm very optimistic in that sense.
Well, good to hear as well. Something beyond our imagination. And, in the meantime, it might be indeed that, as you kind of mentioned, because we do need to run some sort of consistent analysis using supervised machine learning, we need to be able to label the data in a way which is more consistent, and therefore potentially the substance of antitrust might change to accommodate a bit, the use of those tools if we see that they are indeed useful. So the interrelationship between the two is very strong. Gabriele, maybe you have something to say on that as well.
Yes. As Riccardo said, I think that the use of unsupervised machine learning techniques will revolutionize the outcomes of this kind of analysis. Also because of the kind of low amount of data we can always collect with this kind of subjects and antitrust situations. So what could potentially be a very interesting new kind of tools, for example, is regarding the topic modeling. And for that kind of techniques, there should be very, very amazing results. Also, for example, not only for latent Dirichlet allocation, which is like the classical techniques always used, but there are a lot of new techniques also coming out from the network analysis, such as stochastic block, and applied to topic modeling, which could help understand priorly the meanings and the topics spoken by the stakeholders, for example, in their answers to the European Commission's request. And so this could be very helpful into have a deeper insights on what the different kind of stakeholders would like to communicate and to express regarding the antitrust laws and acts.
All right, well, some more optimism. I'm very grateful for that. It's a breath of fresh air in those days. Fabiana, the last word is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Computational antitrust. So computational tools is just another tool in the toolbox. And I think it can be, of course, very useful. So data scientists can tell us a lot, can provide us with a lot of insights, new insights. And I can see this as something new, of course. And we had already a lot of waves in the antitrust and competition law studies. So if we think of what happened with the law and economics studies, and then with the behavioral law and economic studies, we can try to make a parallel with what is now happening with the computational studies. And I can see, basically, I would recommend two things. One is that data scientists work on the replicability of their methodologies, because this is essential for us as lawyers in order to be sure that we can employ with some safety their methodologies. And for us, the lawyers, we are here to understand in what way those methodologies are useful, because the computational methodologies are evolving so fastly. We are here to understand and to be able to sketch which ones are most useful for us in terms of understanding what are the most anti-competitive conduct or even anti-competitive market structure in these digital markets, which are very difficult to understand and that are evolving so fastly. And on these notes, I will conclude.
Yes, thank you very much. And I couldn't agree more when it comes to the replicability of those studies, especially when it involves unsupervised machine learning. It might be a challenge and something we have to come up with solutions for. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. I'm very grateful for that. And take care. Talk to you very soon and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.